Imagine standing on a chaotic, smoke-filled battlefield in the freezing spring of 1781. You are a highly disciplined British redcoat, seasoned by years of global warfare, marching in perfect formation. You believe that no undisciplined rebel militia can ever break your line. But as the black powder smoke clears, the ground beneath you seems to shake. Charging directly toward your ranks is a literal giant of a man. He stands 6 feet 8 inches tall, looming nearly a foot over every other soldier on the field. In his massive, scarred hands, he doesn't carry a standard musket. Instead, he wields a colossal, custom-made 5-foot broadsword, gifted to him by George Washington himself. In a panic, your regiment thrusts their bayonets forward. A steel blade tears deep into the giant's thigh, pinning him to the muddy earth. It is a wound that would instantly collapse any normal man. But this is no normal man. With a roar of pure, primal defiance, the giant doesn't fall. He pulls himself forward through the blade, swings his massive sword, and begins to single-handedly dismantle your elite unit. In a matter of minutes, 11 British soldiers lie defeated in the dirt. This is the legend of Peter Francisco, the Virginia Hercules, a mysterious, abandoned orphan who became the American Revolution's deadliest one-man army. George Washington once remarked that without him, America might have lost the war. How did a lone blacksmith with a giant sword strike absolute terror into the heart of the British Empire? Let's find out. To understand the man who would become America's greatest soldier, we must go back to a foggy summer morning in 1765 on the docks of Stony Point, Virginia. A merchant ship had just departed, leaving behind a confused, crying 5-year-old boy abandoned on the wharf. He was dressed in fine European clothing, but he spoke a language none of the dock workers understood, a strange dialect of Portuguese. He had no name, no family, and no past. He was a nameless castaway in a foreign land. The boy was eventually taken in by Judge Anthony Winston, a wealthy landowner and the uncle of the famous revolutionary orator Patrick Henry. Under Winston's care, the mysterious child was given a name, Peter Francisco. But as Peter grew, he realized he was fundamentally different from everyone else. It wasn't just his mysterious origin, it was his body. By the time Peter was only 16 years old, he had grown to an astonishing 6 feet 8 inches tall, weighing over 260 pounds. In the 18th century, when the average man stood barely 5'5", Peter was a giant among men. To harness his incredible raw strength, Winston apprenticed him to a local blacksmith. Day after day, Peter hammered white-hot iron, his muscles hardening into steel. He became a local legend, capable of carrying 1,000-pound cannon barrels on his shoulders. Yet, beneath this monstrous physical power lay a deep, aching conflict. Peter was an outsider. He was a nameless, abandoned immigrant in a society obsessed with pedigree and class. He had no birthright, no land, and no family name to protect. But as the winds of revolution began to sweep through Virginia, Peter would sit in the back of St. John's Church in Richmond, listening to Patrick Henry cry out, "Give me liberty or give me death." Those words struck a chord deep within the young giant. Peter Francisco realized that while he had no past, he could fight to build a future. He didn't just want to fight for a new nation, he wanted to fight for his own identity. He would forge himself into a patriot, proving to the world that he belonged. In the fall of 1776, At just 16 years old, Peter Francisco enlisted in the 10th Virginia Regiment. But if he expected immediate glory, the harsh reality of global warfare quickly shattered his illusions. Peter was not a decorated officer, he was a simple private, thrust into the brutal, grinding machinery of the Continental Army. His first major baptism of fire came in September 1777, at the bloody Battle of Brandywine. As waves of elite British redcoats surged forward, Peter fought with savage, desperate fury. But the American lines crumbled. In the chaotic, mud-slicked retreat, a British musket ball tore clean through Peter's thigh. He collapsed, bleeding heavily in the grass. It was here, in a makeshift military hospital, that the young giant's path crossed with another wounded, legendary teenager, the Marquis de Lafayette. As they recovered side by side, the wealthy French aristocrat and the abandoned, nameless blacksmith forged an unlikely, lifelong bond of mutual respect. Yet Peter's most brutal trial was not fought on a battlefield of blood, but in a silent valley of ice. In the winter of 1777, the Continental Army camped at Valley Forge. It was a slow-motion catastrophe. Over 2,000 soldiers died of starvation, freezing exposure, and deadly disease. Men wrapped their frost-bitten feet in blood-soaked rags as their horses starved to death. Morale completely collapsed. With Congress failing to send food, shoes, or blankets, survival became a daily battle of pure willpower. Yet, while other men broke, Peter's blacksmith-hardened frame and unyielding spirit became a silent, living pillar of hope. He spent those miserable months hauling massive timber logs through waist-deep snow to build log cabins, and carrying sick, dying comrades to medical tents on his bare shoulders. He did the unglamorous, bone-crushing labor that kept the dying revolution breathing. Through this silent sacrifice, Peter was no longer just a nameless immigrant looking for an identity. He had become the heavy iron anchor holding George Washington's desperate army together in its darkest hour. And when the freezing snows finally melted, the giant of Virginia was ready to be unleashed. By 1779, the American Revolution had dragged into a brutal stalemate. To break Washington's resolve, the British seized Stony Point, an impregnable cliffside fortress jutting into the Hudson River. Bristling with heavy artillery and surrounded by deep water and double-layered wooden barricades, it was deemed absolutely suicide to attack. But Washington needed a victory. He turned to Brigadier General Mad Anthony Wayne to launch a daring, highly classified night assault. Wayne handpicked an elite vanguard of 20 men to lead the charge, a unit historically known as the Forlorn Hope, because they were expected to die in the opening seconds. Among them, volunteering for the front line, was the 19-year-old giant, Peter Francisco. The order was absolute. Muskets must remain completely empty. No loaded guns. Not a single shot was to be fired, lest a premature bang alert the sleeping British garrison. The fortress had to be taken in absolute silence, using only cold steel bayonets. At midnight, under the cover of a pitch-black storm, Peter and his comrades waded through waist-deep mud and ice-cold water to reach the base of the cliffs. As they scrambled up the slippery rocks, the British sentries spotted them. The darkness exploded with musket fire and grape shot. Soldiers fell left and right. A jagged piece of shrapnel ripped across Peter's forehead, opening a deep, blinding gash that poured blood into his eyes. But the giant refused to stop. Ignoring the agony, Peter was the second American to scale the massive wooden walls. He charged directly into the British defenders, swinging his musket like a club and driving his bayonet home. Peter single-handedly cut down the guard at the flagstaff, seized the British regiment's flag, and collapsed from blood loss as the fort was won. He had survived the impossible. 1 year later, in August 1780, Peter's resilience was tested in the sweltering swamplands of South Carolina. General Horatio Gates had marched a ragged American army into a disastrous ambush at Camden. The defeat was total. As the Continental lines collapsed, terrified soldiers threw down their weapons and fled in a wild, disorganized rout. But amidst the absolute panic, Peter Francisco stood his ground. As he retreated through the smoking wreckage, he noticed a critical loss. A massive 1,100-pound American cannon sat abandoned in the mud. The British cavalry was closing in fast, eager to capture the artillery piece as a trophy of war. Peter knew that in war, artillery was everything. He refused to let the enemy have it. With a superhuman burst of adrenaline, the giant blacksmith-turned-soldier got beneath the heavy iron gun. He lifted the colossal cannon onto his bare shoulders and dragged it off the battlefield, hauling it through the swampy woods to prevent it from falling into British hands. As he made his escape, a troop of British cavalry spotted him. One horseman rode ahead, drawing his saber to cut Peter down. Thinking fast, Peter hollowed his chest and feigned exhaustion, pretending to surrender. As the arrogant redcoat rode close, Peter sidestepped, grabbed the soldier's leg, and threw him headfirst off the horse. In one fluid motion, Peter seized the soldier's sword, mounted the horse, and charged the remaining cavalry, shouting, "Huzzah for Washington!" The shocked British riders, believing they had encountered a demon, scattered in terror, allowing Peter to ride back to American lines with the captured horse and the saved cannon. Stories of the giant's near mythical strength and bravery at Stony Point and Camden quickly spread through the ranks, eventually reaching the ears of George Washington himself. The commander-in-chief recognized that a man of Peter's monumental proportions was severely limited by standard-issue military gear. A regular musket was like a toy in his massive hands. A standard short sword was useless. So Washington ordered a custom weapon, forged specifically for the giant of Virginia. It was a massive 6-pound broadsword. The polished steel blade alone measured 5 feet in length, nearly as tall as an average soldier. This weapon was a relic of a bygone medieval era, but in the hands of Peter Francisco, it was the ultimate tool of destruction. In early 1781, Peter was assigned to Colonel William Washington's Light Dragoons, an elite American cavalry unit sent south to join General Nathaniel Greene's campaign of strategic attrition. This was a brutal cat-and-mouse war designed to bleed the British Army dry. Peter was no longer just a defensive anchor. He was now Washington's elite shock trooper, a terrifying weapon of terror waiting to be unleashed. The climax of Peter Francisco's war came on March 15, 1781, at a small rural outpost in North Carolina, Guilford Courthouse. General Greene had lured the exhausted, starving army of Lord Cornwallis into a deadly, multi-layered defensive trap. The battle was a savage, hand-to-hand slaughter in the dense underbrush. As the British Guards began to push through the American lines, Colonel William Washington ordered a desperate cavalry charge to halt their advance. Peter Francisco rode in the first wave. With his massive 5-foot broadsword raised high, the giant crashed into the elite British guards like a runaway freight train. The sheer violence of his assault struck instant panic into the enemy. Peter swung his massive blade with terrifying speed, cleaving through steel helmets and muskets. One British soldier managed to lunge forward, driving a bayonet deep into Peter's leg. The steel blade pinned his thigh to his horse's saddle. But the giant did not fall. He didn't even flinch. Roaring in fury, Peter pulled his leg through the impaling bayonet, raised his giant broadsword, and cleaved the soldier's head in a single stroke. He continued to fight, blood pouring from his open thigh wound, single-handedly cutting down 11 British soldiers in the melee. The slaughter was so terrifying that Lord Cornwallis, watching in utter horror, made a decision of cold desperation. He ordered his own artillery to fire grape shot directly into the hand-to-hand combat, killing his own men along with the Americans to stop the cavalry charge. Peter was blown from his horse, covered in wounds, and left for dead on the blood-soaked field. Yet his legendary charge had broken the back of the British elite, forcing Cornwallis into a Pyrrhic victory that ultimately ruined his army and set the stage for the final checkmate of the war.
Peter Francisco survived the horrific wounds of Guilford Courthouse, but his personal battles did not end when the guns of the Revolution finally fell silent. While the British eventually surrendered at Yorktown, the giant, who had single-handedly broken their elite forces, returned home to a young nation that quickly forgot his massive sacrifice. He had spent his entire youth forging a new country in blood, yet he lived his remaining years in constant financial struggle, fighting a slow-moving Congress for years just to receive a basic soldier's pension. When he finally passed away in Richmond in 1831, he was buried with grand military honors. But his incredible name gradually faded into the quiet margins of history. Today, Peter Francisco remains a forgotten giant. He was a nameless, abandoned immigrant child who asked for nothing but a chance to belong, and in return became the ultimate shield of the American Revolution. He proved that the destiny of a nation does not always rest on the shoulders of wealthy, educated generals, but sometimes on the unyielding spine of a lone blacksmith with a giant 5-foot sword. If you believe the forgotten heroes and overlooked moments of history deserve to have their stories told, please hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling us which historical figure we should cover next. We read every single comment. Thank you for watching.